I was 62, divorced, and starting over. Moving to the Philippines changed everything. People have a specific look they give you when you tell them your marriage ended after 31 years. It's not quite pity. It's not quite judgment. It's somewhere in between, and it lands on your face like a hand you didn't ask for. I got that look a lot the year I turned 62. From my sister, from the women at my old book club, from the couple across the street who'd known us both since the kids were in grade school. They'd tilt their heads just slightly and say the same thing in slightly different words. You'll be okay? You'll figure it out? You just need time. What none of them said, what nobody says, is what happens when the time runs out and you still don't recognize your own life. I had a house I couldn't afford on my own, a part-time job at a dental office that paid enough to matter, but not enough to build anything on. Two grown kids who called on Sundays and had their own problems. And a social security check coming in at $1,440 a month that was supposed to be the foundation of a retirement I'd spent 30 years imagining with someone else. The someone else was gone. The retirement was still coming. And I had absolutely no idea what to do with it. That's where this story starts. Not with a beach, not with a sunset. With a Tuesday in February, a legal pad covered in numbers that didn't add up, and the slow, quiet realization that the life I'd been planning was a life that required two people. I only had one. I want to be honest about the divorce because I think it matters to the story. It wasn't dramatic. There was no affair, no explosion, no moment you could point to and say, there, that's where it broke. We'd just become two people who were very good at living in the same house and very bad at actually being together. After the kids left, there was nothing left underneath us. We tried for 2 years after that, and then we stopped trying. 31 years, 2 kids, 1 house, and somewhere in there we'd both quietly disappeared from each other's lives without either of us noticing until it was already done. The divorce was final on a Thursday. I remember because I had to work the next day, and I sat in the parking lot of the dental office for 12 minutes before I could make myself go inside. After the settlement, I had $31,000 in savings, a car that was paid off, and a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in a town where everything I looked at reminded me of a life I no longer had. My monthly expenses, rent, utilities, car insurance, Medicare supplement, groceries, prescriptions, came to just over $1,600. My income was $1,440. Every month I was going backwards by about $160. Not a crisis, not an emergency. Just a slow, steady leak that if I did nothing, would drain everything I had within a few years. I was 62 years old, and I was starting over on a deficit. I found the videos the way most people my age find things, by accident, at an hour I shouldn't have been awake. I'd been searching something like retirement on Social Security alone, and somewhere in that rabbit hole I ended up watching a woman, maybe 10 years older than me, sitting on a small balcony somewhere tropical, drinking coffee, talking about her grocery bill. She'd paid something like $40 for a week of food, fresh vegetables, fish, fruit, everything from a market she walked to every morning. I watched that video 3 times. Then I watched every video she'd ever made. Then I started watching other people. Americans, mostly. Some of them had more money than me. Plenty of them didn't. What they all had in common was this particular quality of unhurriedness. They weren't performing contentment. They just looked like people who had stopped being in a hurry and found out that was actually enough. The Philippines kept coming up. English was spoken widely. The culture had warmth woven into it at a structural level. The food was extraordinary and cheap. And the cost of living was Cheshire by the standards of a woman bleeding $160 a month in central Ohio, almost incomprehensible. I spent 3 months reading before I told anyone. I joined forums, I read threads from people who'd made mistakes and were honest about them. I read about the visa process, the healthcare, the heat. I made spreadsheets. I printed things out and read them with a pen. I was not going to do this carelessly. When I finally told my daughter, Renee, she went quiet in the way she does when she's scared, but trying not to show it. Mum, the Philippines? Do you know anyone there? I told her I didn't. I told her that was partly the point. She asked me to wait 3 more months before booking anything. I waited 2, then I bought the ticket. I want to tell you about the moment at the airport, because it was the first time the whole thing became real. I was at the check-in counter in Columbus. 2 bags, carry-on, passport. The agent asked if I had proof of onward travel. I did. I'd read enough to know the Philippines requires it for tourists, and I'd bought a dummy ticket out. I pulled it up on my phone and handed it over. She looked at it and handed my passport back. You're all set. And I stood there and thought, I am 62 years old. I am divorced. I have never done anything like this in my entire life. Then I picked up my bags and went through security. The flight was Manila, then a connecting flight to Cebu, then a bus to a ferry, then a short ride into Dumaguete. 24 hours of travel, give or take. By the time I walked out of that small airport into the heat, and I cannot overstate the heat, it's not a temperature. It's a weather system that wraps around you and simply claims you. I had been awake for something close to 30 hours, and I was not sure I was still a person with working reasoning. A woman holding a small sign with my guest house name walked straight up to me before I even finished looking around. She took one of my bags without asking. First time? I said yes. She said, "You will like it here. Everyone likes it here." She said it the way you'd state a fact about gravity. I got into the car and looked out the window and tried to absorb it. The tricycles, the colours of the buildings, the way the road worked, which was its own education. The trees I couldn't name. The smell of something frying from somewhere I couldn't see. It was nothing like anything I had been prepared for, and it was everything like what I'd watched on a screen for 3 months, and somehow those two things were both true at the same time. That first night, I sat on the edge of the guest house bed in the heat, and I thought, everyone back home is going to be right. I've lost my mind. I didn't call Renee. I knew my voice would give me away. I texted her 3 words, arrived, it's warm, and went to sleep. The first week was an education in how many things I'd been doing on autopilot for 31 years. Buying groceries, asking for directions, figuring out how to get somewhere, understanding prices. All of it, every ordinary errand I'd done without thinking since I was in my 20s, suddenly required my full attention. It was exhausting in a way I hadn't expected. Not bad, just demanding. Like my brain had been given a new job without any training. But there were mornings. The mornings I was not prepared for. I'd wake up early from the jet lag, step outside before the heat built, and the city would be doing this thing where it was already alive. Vendors setting up, tricycles starting their routes, the smell of garlic rice drifting from somewhere a block away, but still quiet enough to walk through without feeling pushed. I'd go to the Palenque, the wet market, and just move through it slowly. Mangoes that smelled like mangoes are supposed to smell, but almost never do in Ohio. Fish that were caught that morning laid out on ice. Vegetables I recognized and some I didn't. And women who would show me what things were called if I pointed and looked confused enough. There was a woman who sold tomatoes and onions from a small wooden table near the entrance. On my 4th morning, she smiled at me in a way that wasn't about the transaction. Just, I've seen you before. You're here again. Good. That was it. That was the whole thing. And I walked back to the guest house with my bag of tomatoes, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time, which was that I was somewhere I was supposed to be. I want to tell you what I didn't expect, because the easy version of this story leaves it out. I was lonely. Not all the time. Not even most of the time. But in a specific, precise way that I hadn't budgeted for. There were evenings when I'd be sitting on my balcony. I'd moved into a small apartment by then, 2 months in, watching families walk along the boulevard. And I'd think about the life I'd expected to have at 62, the one where there was a person next to me, the one I'd spent 3 decades building toward. That life wasn't coming. I'd known that since the parking lot outside the dental office. But knowing it and feeling it are different things, and some evenings in Dumaguete, they were very much not the same. I almost went home. I should say that plainly. At around week 6, I had my laptop open, flights to Columbus pulled up. Not because Dumaguete had failed me, because I was sad in a way that didn't have a practical solution. And sadness has a reflex toward the familiar, even when the familiar was what broke you. What stopped me was a Wednesday afternoon. I had been apartment hunting, and my real estate contact, a cheerful woman named Marcy, who'd been an expat for 7 years and had strong opinions about cross-ventilation, had introduced me to the woman who ran a small carinderia, a lunch counter, 2 streets from the apartment I was about to take. Her name was Lita. She was maybe 55. She'd been widowed 4 years earlier, had 2 kids in Manila, and ran her little kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd decided that feeding people well was a sufficient reason to get up every morning. I started eating lunch there every day. After about a week, she started making me a small extra bowl of something whenever she was testing a new dish. No explanation. Just placed it in front of me. Try this. Tell me what you think. I didn't know enough about the food to give her useful feedback, and I think she knew that, but she asked anyway. And I'd try it and say something honest, and she'd nod and go back to the kitchen. A month later, she knew I liked things spicy and didn't love coconut milk and preferred fish to pork when there was a choice. I hadn't told her any of that. She'd just paid attention. I sat with that for a long time. 31 years in a marriage, and I'm not sure anyone had paid that kind of attention to what I actually liked. Not out of cruelty, just out of the way long familiarity can make a person invisible. Here was a woman I'd known for 5 weeks who knew how I liked my food because she'd been watching. I didn't book the flights home. I unpacked the rest of my suitcase that evening. I'd been living out of it, I realized, like a signal to myself that I could still leave, and I put my things in the drawers. Let me give you the numbers, because this is the part people need. My apartment was 13,500 pesos a month. At the exchange rate when I moved in, that was about $240. 1 bedroom, tiled floors, ceiling fan, a wall unit in the bedroom I used at night, a balcony with a view of a neighbor's mango tree. In Columbus, my 1 bedroom was $875. The apartments were not dissimilar in size. Electricity ran me around 2,800 pesos on a medium month, about $50. Water was negligible, under $8. Internet, which I needed for video calls with Renee and her kids, was 1,699 pesos, around $30. I paid a woman named Gloria to clean and do laundry twice a week, 3,200 pesos a month, roughly $57, and she became one of the people I looked forward to seeing most. Food was where the change was almost impossible to explain to anyone back home. I was eating better than I had in years. More vegetables, more fresh fish, more actual cooking, and spending maybe $90 a month doing it. That included eating out several times a week at places like Lita's, where a full meal with rice cost less than $2 American. My medications, I take a blood pressure pill and a thyroid prescription. Cost me $18 a month at the pharmacy 2 blocks from my apartment. In Ohio, with Medicare, I was paying just over $60. All in, my real monthly number was sitting between $620 and $680. My Social Security check was $1,440. For the first time since the divorce paperwork was signed, I was not going backwards. I was going forward. Not dramatically. Not getting rich forward. Just the quiet, stabilizing forward of knowing that the number at the end of the month is larger than the number at the beginning. I called Renee on a Sunday about 3 months in, and she asked how I was doing, and I said, I think I'm going to be okay. And I meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in a long time. There was a morning, about 8 months after I arrived, when I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about the divorce in 11 days. Not that it was over, or that it hadn't happened, or that it didn't matter. Just that it had stopped being the first thing that happened when I opened my eyes. Something else had moved in. The sound of the street. The plan to get to the market before the best tomatoes were gone. The text I needed to send Lita about whether she was making kare kare on Thursday. Small things. Real things. The architecture of a life that was actually mine. I had a routine. I knew people. I had a woman who saved me the good fish, and a neighbour named Tess who knocked on my door when there was a brownout and brought candles and instant coffee, and we'd sit on the landing in the dark and talk until the power came back. I had a doctor I liked who spoke to me like an adult and charged me $12 for a consultation. I had Sunday mornings on the boulevard, watching the families and the old men and the children on bikes. And I'd stopped feeling like an observer. I was one of the old women on the bench. I had made my peace with that. It was, I discovered, a very good thing to be. The hard parts are still there. I want to be clear about that, because this is not a brochure. The heat doesn't stop being hard. It moderates. You adapt. But there are days in April when the air just sits on you and you make your peace with moving slowly and not caring how you look. The bureaucracy of the visa process would test the patience of a saint. The lines, the forms, the offices that run on their own schedule. There are things I miss about home that I didn't expect to miss. Hardware stores with every conceivable fitting. The smell of autumn. Renee's kids' school plays, which I watch on a phone now instead of from a folding chair in a gymnasium. That one doesn't get easier. And there is a specific loneliness in being a divorced woman in a place that runs on family. You see it everywhere. The 3-generation tables at the restaurants, the cousins who all live within walking distance, the assumption baked into the culture that no one should ever really be alone. It's beautiful, and sometimes it aches. You are loved here in a wide, general, neighbor and regular customer kind of way. But the particular love of someone who chose you specifically, is a different thing. I am not pretending otherwise. What I will tell you is that starting over at 62 was not the end of something. It turned out to be the first time in years that I was building something that was entirely, specifically mine. Not a shared project, not a compromise. Mine. My market, my carinderia, my balcony, my routine, my small, brave life in a city most of the people I know couldn't find on a map. Renee came to visit last April. She stayed for 10 days. I was more nervous than I've been about anything since the divorce papers, which surprised me. I didn't know until she landed how much I needed her to see it. Not to approve, not to give me permission, just to see that what I had here was real. On her 3rd day, we went to Lita's for lunch. I didn't explain anything, just took her there. Lita brought out an extra dish without being asked, something she was testing, and set it in front of me. We ate. We talked. We watched the street. Walking back, Renee was quiet for a block. Then she said, "She knows what you like." I said, "She does." Another block. Then, "You seem like yourself, Mom. Like the version of yourself before everything got complicated." I forgot that person existed. I didn't say anything. We kept walking. But I thought about it for a long time afterward. That phrase, before everything got complicated. She didn't mean the divorce. She meant further back than that. The years of managing and adjusting and disappearing a little at a time into a life that had slowly become about everything but me. I found that person in a small city in the Philippines on the wrong side of 62, going backwards by $160 a month, with 2 suitcases and a one-way ticket, and no idea what I was doing. If you're sitting somewhere right now with your own legal pad and your own numbers that don't add up, and something in you has been watching videos at midnight because you're looking for evidence that another way exists, I'm here to tell you it does. It is on the other side of a very long flight and a wall of heat and a week of feeling like you've made a terrible mistake. And on the other side of that week, there is a woman who will notice how you like your food. There is a market that smells like the world is still good. There is a balcony and a cup of coffee and a morning that belongs entirely to you. I wake up now, and the first thing that happens is the street, the tricycle, the gecko on the ceiling, the light coming in early and warm. I am 64 years old. I am divorced. I am starting over. And I have never, in my entire life, been more at home.